I'm Dr. John. This is your Maintenance Minute. We're continuing our discussion on the 32 storeroom processes. We're up to emergency procurement. This is interesting. You really need to have a process for this and understand what constitutes the need to make a purchase of a spare part, either a stocked item that you don't have or an item that you don't stock but you need to get. It's an emergency procurement. The presumption is there's a real urgent need for this part. How many of you have actually paid to rush a part in? Sometimes the freight costs more than the part does, but how many folks have actually rushed the part in, received it, called the person who ordered it, and it's still sitting in your storeroom on a shelf with that person's name on it, probably on a red tag? I'm going to guess that just about every one of you had. We've got to have a process for this. It is absolutely necessary that we have some standard means by which we ensure that we absolutely have to have that part. Here's what we do know. You don't get a part out of the storeroom unless you have a work order. You don't order a part unless you have a work order. You definitely don't rush a part in unless you have a work order, right? So that's going to go in our procedures or in our process. This is typically done under a P card. I don't know, there probably are emergency purchase orders that are issued, but sometimes I've seen most likely it's a P card. And oftentimes we're using a P card because the person or the organization, the vendor supplier we're getting it from may not be an approved vendor, so we have to use essentially a credit card. So it is vital. We got to have a process for this. And you know what? It should hurt a little bit, right? We shouldn't just be ordering things, emergency procurement, and then never say a word about it. Somebody ought to be called in front of the plant manager, not in a punitive way, but what happened? Let's talk about what happened, because I never want to purchase things on an emergency basis. It's necessary. We're going to have to. There's no chance that we're never going to order something and rush it in. But somebody ought to answer for it. Again, it's not in a punitive sense, but when the dust settles and the machine's back and up and running, we ought to have a discussion about what happened, right? There should be somebody answering for it. And there's actually a world-class number for this. It says that probably less than 2% of all of our purchase orders, if you will, should be what we would consider emergency or urgent, where we have to kind of circumvent the normal, just kind of wait till it comes in. This is very important. If you're over this 2% right here, you've got a real problem and you need to think about it. If it doesn't hurt when you do an emergency procurement, that is to say, no one ever says what happens. We all just sort of ignore that it ever happened. We've got a problem. We need to talk about that. If you don't have a process, there's no chance that you're doing it the best way in the world possible. There's certainly no chance that you're working to improvement. And there's certainly no chance that you're not following that rule that we don't order a part, we don't rush in a part unless we have a work order. And it's very likely that you have parts in your storeroom on a shelf somewhere with a red tag hanging with somebody's name who just absolutely had to have that part today and is still sitting in your storeroom. Look, we got to get this right. Let's create a process. Let's get this happening. I'm Dr. John, and this has been your Maintenance Minute.